Hello, this is Stephen Black. I am here with Travis Grant.
Hi, this is Travis.
Welcome to our first podcast on stephenblack.co. We are excited to present Roxanne Meadows of the Venus Project. Recorded on the 29th of September 2014 and released the 15th of October 2014. Roxanne, what is the greatest mistake you have made prior to that of understanding an RBE, and what is the greatest mistake you have made since reaching this understanding?
I don't use that language. I wouldn't say I made a mistake at all before I came to an RBE, which means before I met Jacques in 1976. I was born into a certain environment and kind of blown with the wind within it. Learned very little. I was interested in art. I went to school for art, which equips you for absolutely nothing, fine arts, but I was very interested and worked a lot at it during school, after school hours, after I graduated. So, my parents were supposedly liberal, but it doesn't mean much in this culture to me anymore, that term, which means they were more so against war, things like that. They said that they were against bigotry, but they weren't. As soon as I dated somebody black, there were different behaviors. So I don't use that language that I made a mistake.
Okay,
I couldn't have done much other. And
let's rephrase that if that's okay then. Instead of saying mistake, let's say misunderstanding that was not caused by you, but brought on by your environment. Something that you may have believed very strongly that you later realized was completely a complete fabrication.
I think I'm learning all along the way and still learning in terms of becoming aware of what's been instilled a long time ago and examining my reactions along the way. It's an ongoing battle, to practice what you've learned, essentially. So I don't really have any one thing that I can say, this is a mistake I had before, or this was a misunderstanding. My political views were what they were because of my parents, my schools, whatever I encountered. This environment that we grow up in doesn't equip you for very much. And I guess I could say that after about 2 months of being with Jacques and being exposed to going to his lectures more so than just being with him, that I learned that everything I had been taught before, all the values, were erroneous. And I felt I had to start all over again.
It's very interesting. And I just wanted to clarify a reason for asking that is just because, as you and Jacques have often said, that we make more mistakes than anybody else kind of thing. And I think it's very important for people in developing to realize that we do make not only mistakes, but we shouldn't call them mistakes, and I like how you put that. That's very eloquent. Rather, these are just us learning and understanding our environment more, and while things might not happen as we predicted, it's not a mistake. It's something that we can learn from. And to just encourage people to not be afraid, or to be able to admit when they believed one thing and they later discover contradiction and now they believe something else.
Sure, being able to change is the greatest thing you can do. And in this culture, it's frowned upon, especially in politics. They bring it up all the time. You're flip-flopping or whatever. Good, you've learned new things, you've changed, you've adapted to new technologies and new ideas and new values. Hopefully you change. Otherwise, not much hope. Because our values were handed down from centuries ago. And we still practice the same traditions, still have the same notions, and still have the same beliefs as people literally thousands of years ago. So Jacques always says, which I always thought was interesting, I make more mistakes than anyone because I try more things. So,
yeah, I like that quote a lot.
Yeah, me too.
And so could you tell us how you first met Jacques? What was your first encounter like?
I was first exposed to his lectures, his 60s and 70 lectures. Somebody approached me, and he had gone to Jacques' lectures, and he started talking to me about his designs. And then he had some of Jacques' lectures, I was on a cruise ship. I was doing bad portraits. I used to travel around a lot, and I used to think it was really interesting. I did portraits because I could travel, and people would pay me to practice what I wanted to practice. So that's how I did it, through traveling and doing portraits. So I was on a cruise ship, and somebody was playing in the band, and he approached me and talked to me about some of Jacques' ideas. And he talked to me about how Jacques came up with Velcro, and after during World War II, he approached the Navy. He was in the Navy, and talked to him about Velcro boots and Velcro pants, because at that time you had a lot of buttons. I don't know if you remember those buttons, and you had to lace up your shoes, and by the time they had a bomb up on the deck and you had to get dressed, the place would be wiped out. So Jacques came up with Velcro, and he went to whoever he had to go to and said, I have something that could really help the people get killed less or injured less, and he explained the idea that you could just snap it together. And he got it from the burge, that stuck to clothes and things. So the guy said, well, that's a very interesting idea, but you forget one thing. And Jacques was wondering, what the hell did I forget, And he said, tradition. It's a tradition to have them soldiers being bombed to smithereens, So keep up that tradition. So anyway, he talked to me about that, and I thought it was interesting. And then he had some lectures on tape. And I would go listen to the lectures in his room when he was playing in the band. And immediately I got off the cruise ship and went to his lecture. Jacques was in Miami at the time. And I stayed. I was, a lot of people come here and say, oh, I'd love to stay. I don't want to leave the Venus Project. And I was a lucky one that got to stay, I always thought. So, and then I started taking art lessons from Jacques. But it wasn't art lessons. It was technical illustration. And that was kind of hard, because I had a background of very sloppy bad habits, and I had to undo that to learn technical illustration, which you can teach anybody how to draw. There's nothing mysterious about it. There's no talent that you have if you know the process, and I'd never seen any teacher teach the way Jacques does, and he takes people very quickly. So I started on his designs, doing airplanes, doing cutaways of domes and things, and even when we did the domes here, when we had to do the blueprints, the architects couldn't draw the domes, so I had to do the blueprints and then give it to them to do the math of the engineers. So that's how it started. And then every weekend, I think he was lecturing about 2 or 3 times a week during that time in his home. And we have some of those lectures on our website, the classic lectures.
Yes, I've enjoyed those quite a bit. I've listened to it, and
talk about a different point of view,
exactly.
Different way of looking at the world.
It is quite useful. I've gotten a lot out of those.
Yeah.
And we took the tour yesterday, and you said is this correct, that you didn't ask Jacques a question for 7 years? And if it is, what was your first question?
No, it wasn't that I didn't ask questions. I asked questions right away. And my questions were based on whatever I was thinking on the time, just limited. But it took me a long time before I could put certain things together before I felt I could speak to other people about it. So I would talk so far, and then I felt like I hit a brick wall, It's just like drawing. It's just like mechanical processes. When you're learning how to draw and you get to a certain point, there's nothing wrong with you. You just didn't learn the next step to be able to take it farther. You're just lacking some information. Same thing with this process too.
It's a process of integration that can take time, and sometimes you need to take a break and allow the integration to occur.
Especially when you come from a background from art, which is, if you know, reference to the real world. And I was pretty immersed in that. So I had a lot of catching up to do.
Generally, how many books do you read per month? And what are some of your favorites or pieces of written work outside of the material put out by TVP?
I don't know if I count how many I read, but mostly right now, which is kind of interesting and fun to do, I read out loud to Jacques. When we get into bed, I read out loud. And so we just read a lot of books on the book list. We read books outside of the book list, so I have to drag them up and show you. I don't remember the names offhand, but because we read different ones. Other than the ones on the book list, Tyranny of Words or Walden 2, Mind in the Making, those are older books, but we also have several that we do at the same time. I'll show you after the interview.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Jacques moved to Florida around what time?
I don't know. It was long before I met him. I met him in 76, and I think he was here in the 60s.
And there was a group of people that moved here with Jacques approximately, I guess, around the 60s. It's my understanding, and I don't know that this is truthful, this is just what I've heard, that when Jacques moved here, there was some sort of organization associated...
When you mean here, you mean...
To Florida,
oh,
yes.
Well, he came to Florida. Are you talking about Venus, when he moved to Venus?
No,
or he moved to
just
Florida?
to Florida.
That I hadn't heard. I don't know if people came with him from California or not.
Oh, but that's where he came from. He came from California. It was my understanding that some people moved here with him.
To ask him.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
He had quite a following when I met him in 76, and quite a few people coming to the tours, and to the lectures. There were more so lectures at that time.
And was there another organization prior to the formation of the Venus Project?
There was. When I came in 1976, and it was formed before that, it was a nonprofit organization called Socio-Cyberneering, which was a great name now, I think. But that was before the word cyber became popular. And it was engineering and cybernation applied to the social system. Nobody could say the word, and nobody could remember it. But now, they're using words like that all the time, cybernetics and things like that. But when we moved here to Venus, we just named it something simple. Mm-hmm. Yeah, named it after the town. It's not metaphysical,
It's good. I love the name Socio-Cyberneering. So.
Yeah, I do too now.
It has, as you explained it very well, it has a lot of meaning in it. So you broke land and began building structures here in Venus, Florida around 1980.
Right.
And you have previously stated that this facility would be used for both research and the promotion of an RBE. What are some of the most interesting research projects you have conducted here over the past 34 years?
Well, we moved here mainly to experiment with some of Jacques' building processes. So we put up, I'd have to say we didn't do what we wanted to do. We did what we could afford to do. We had no outside funding. So I held a job to be able to continue this. Jacques lectured and produced books and sold his books. So, it was a slow, laborious project. Not the way we'd want to do it again. We'd want to make sure we have the funding to do what we want. So we couldn't do a lot of the research we wanted to do, but even to make the buildings smarter and more efficient. So, but we did put up 10 buildings, and we put up 2 buildings that Jacques used to shoot and make his models in. We have 2 shops. I had my shop because of my business. I had to build models too, but for developers. And Jacques had his shop. And we have 3 residents. And I always thought it was a fantastic way for kids or people to learn, because first, I saw the process of learning how to do technical illustration, saw how that applied to fine arts. Then learn how to make models, as I mentioned on Jacques' materials, then turn that into real buildings. And the interesting thing about doing these buildings, too, is you couldn't go to the store and buy a window that fit into this building because it was a different shape. So you had to kind of learn how to think on your feet and develop new things. And Jacques was a master at that, so I had a good teacher. Then you live in the building and work on the building and see what doesn't work, and you do something else. It's a great learning tool, and I think that's a great process for kids to go through, in the city, too.
What was some of the research that you wanted to do here that you weren't able to do, as you stated?
Well, there's a lot of... Jacques has hundreds of designs and blueprints, and we wanted to do a lot of those things. We wanted to build the electric car that he did. We wanted to put dissimilar metals in the rooftops, a lot of energy systems that Jacques came up with that he had been experimenting in his lab before I ever met him, that we really couldn't apply because we didn't have the funding. We were very limited with funding. And a lot of times we would just wait for the next job before we could put a window in, and in between we'd dig holes on the land for the plants that we wanted to plant. So, and we just worked all the time. And once we got enough of the buildings up, we both started on the models, but then I diverted to making money with the models, and I did architectural renderings and architectural models when there was a boom in Florida. When the bus came in 2010, I think it was, I don't know, 8, 10, that was the last job I ever had. So, but interestingly enough, I always say, when I lost my business, even living with Jacques about 25 years before that, and we'd get into bed and Jacques would explain certain things on science with me, and I was so tired I couldn't take advantage of all that, because I'd work from the time I woke up to the time I went to bed. And I always say I learned more after I lost my job about this direction than before. So even though it accelerated in a short period of time after that. But so there was a lot of things we wanted to do that we couldn't do. And also we started a project. We were trying to do a project with a lot of the people that used to attend the lectures in Miami. Mm-hmm. And they did pitch in some money, and we bought 40 acres of land in Naples. That was before it was a very expensive place. And the land prices really went up very high. And but the people stopped giving the money toward the land and the mortgage, and they just copped out. Most of them really weren't doers, but there were just a few that did the blueprints, that learned the drawings, and so they said you'd never get it done. And just for the hell of it, Jacques went to the zoning board after they all stopped. We had to sell the land. We couldn't afford the mortgage. There were about 3 people that continued. And so we went to the zoning board, and Jacques asked them for about 15 minutes of their time to show what we had, blueprints to show what we were going to do on the land, just to see, because the people said, oh, you'll never get the zoning board to go along with you, and you can't do what you want, and they just kind of left. And so Jacques spent about an hour with them, the head of the zoning board, and then he said he'll do everything he can to help, and how can he join the organization? And Jacques said, well, we don't have an organization anymore, and we just had to sell the land, and that's when we bought this land. We had to sell it at a loss. There's a lot of rumors going around out there, I know. I've seen some of those ridiculous things. And then we moved here. We bought this land from the money that Jacques had when he sold his house in Miami. Yeah.
This weekend when we took the tour, I asked Jacques whether or not the system that he and you proposed could also be referred to as an access-based system. Right now it's known as a resource-based economy, and he said yes, it could also be referred to as an access-based system. In and around 1989, the internet and the TCP protocol went global. How have you and Jacques integrated this new form of distributed access into the proposed city that you have been developing as a medium for distributing access to information?
As it is now, or how it would be in the future, is that what you're saying?
Well, that's interesting. How do you see it integrated into the system into the future, or have you integrated it?
I could say now, we've been working here, and Jacques been working since he was very young at this, He's developed it when he was really young, this process, and expanded on it. But it kind of, I look at it, it kind of had to wait until the times caught up with Jacques. People always say, oh, you're way ahead of your time. And we say, no, the times are behind him, because he's a product of whatever he went through. He had to come up with what he came up with within this culture. But so the thing that got this information out to people, because we were essentially banned from the news, or people abroad, media abroad did more information, more magazines on what we were doing, magazine articles. We did have television, local television and magazine people from around the world somewhat here. But it wasn't until there were a couple of documentaries, Future by Design and of course Zeitgeist's Addendum, but it was because of the internet where it could be seen, because the corporate news is not going to, even now, especially in America, they're not talking about this. I think the only thing we have a presence on really is RT recently, and Russia Today. Their media is quite different, much more interesting, much broader. So even on the most progressive stations today here, like Free Speech or Link TV, I still think Russia Today has them beat in terms of information.
But the technical integration into your proposal of the functional elements of the internet, has there been since 1980? Have the
Well, Jacques talked about that process.
Mm-hmm.
He always talked about things would be computerized and being able to send information. If you look at his book, Looking Forward, you'll even see a picture of him describing cars, for instance, how advanced he was in his technology, cars being put together on this assembly line, the drawing, on a molecular form. And so he was describing nanotechnology at the time, too. But he was a huge advocate of technology surpassing menial jobs and boring jobs, and distributing information and transferring information around the world. You know, he would describe the process, but there was no name for it at that time, and it wasn't developed technically, you know. So how he integrates it is probably how he always talked about it, but it's much more advanced, makes it much more easy. Makes it much easier. I mean, he would talk about Corsan, which is, comparable to me to the internet as a main body of data that was global, you know, for a global resource-based economy, centralized, but it could be duplicated in different parts of the world as well.
And Corsan stands for Correlation Center, right? That's at least I believe how it's described in Looking Forward.
Yeah.
What were some of your major contributions to the proposal?
Well, Jacques had a lot of this worked out before I came along. I was just lucky to meet him and learn from him. And I always thought I wanted to contribute as much as possible. And I figured I really needed to learn something technical so I could contribute. So I worked really hard at learning technical illustration, blueprints, a lot of different things. My contribution to the work was helping to get it out to as many people as I could in any way possible, and helping to build things and build models. And I guess I had a hand in almost everything that we've done, except, and somewhat, Jacques is a designer of the direction and the designer of the buildings. I studied with him about design as well, but what you see are his designs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
But I helped build the buildings. I helped make the money for it. I helped put together the books. Doing the documentaries, editing. I help any way I can here and keeping the place together.
So aside from a land assessment, what are some of the gaps in the proposal? What work still needs to be done? There's a YouTube video, I don't remember who put it out, the Venus Project, clearly, but who actually created the 3D models of a walkthrough of one of the cities. But there's the technical functional elements within the buildings or within the spaces. The infrastructure isn't there. So what gaps, what work still needs to be done to actually complete the first proposal such that an engineer could take it and begin building the first city?
We could do that now. We just need a team of architects, and sitting down with Jacques primarily, or me if Jacques' not around anymore, because I've gone through that with him many times, and describing it, showing them different sketches and things. There is no gap other than right now funding for it. Mm-hmm. Or we're also trying to develop a group of architects, but it's a huge job doing the whole infrastructure for a city. Yeah. So, we have had bids on it before, because, we always, and more so lately, we have people coming to us and asking us, saying they want to do the city, how much will it cost, or different things. So we have had quotes on a small city, self-contained, but there's nothing that, in the first city, we would build it with a lot of the existing materials and initially to get in it quickly, and the best that we can find for energy and recycling and everything like that. There's no mystery in that. But we would be using that first city to develop a lot of the processes that Jacques has, and other people too that could contribute. So we would be using it as a research center to develop the building processes, the automated systems to make the next city better and more efficient, and using less resources, less waste, everything like that. And we would also use it as a learning center, be a huge school toward this direction.
So part of the reason why we don't see a presentation on YouTube of the internals is because you don't have the resources, or no one's actually devoted the time to creating the internal spaces of these.
No, we have some of them. Oh. We've developed some of them, but it's for the Venus project, and a lot of I can only say that, put it this way, I think I explained it to you in the tour, that Jacques used to design aircraft for Northrop and for the Army, and you saw, astonishingly, the aircraft were used to go bomb quicker and faster. He made hip prosthesis and knee prosthesis and a lot of medical devices, hundreds of medical devices, and only the wealthy could take advantage of them. And then he worked with drug addicts and alcoholics, did a lot of different things, but the designs were not, they were used competitively, they were used for the benefit of a few profited from them, and that's not what he wanted. He doesn't want to put his designs and technology, making a green building or something like that, or keeping some land for a green space, is not going to change this system. He wants to use his designs toward a resource-based economy. Whatever you build in this system we think would be flawed and polluted and violated. We're not interested in this system. And so we're proposing a different one, and we want to use those designs within that system.
So to rephrase the question, what are some of the risks or uncertainties in the founding and development of this first city?
I don't go into it like that. I know whenever we do something in the future, there'd be a lot of studies as to the damaging effects of whatever major projects we're proposing, and the good effects. And we have to weigh certain things and develop alternatives. Like when they built dams, they found that the fish couldn't go through to migrate, and they, as you go along, they do steps on the side of the dams, I think now, so the fish can get up. But it's always a process of improving, building something, doing something, try it out. If it doesn't work, then change it or improve it. That's the same history with all invention. That's how the airplane came along. People built upon it and developed it and improved things. So I'm sure that there'll be lots of problems, especially since this is a new direction. But if there's enough people that understand that and understand the potentials of this direction, you work through that. And there'll be less as it goes along in certain areas and more in other areas. So I can't really pinpoint any one. I know the problems now are that enough people don't know about this, enough people don't work toward it. We don't have the funds to be able to produce the city right now,
So the people who would participate and contribute to the first city, clearly they would be individuals with technical skills, yes, possibly engineers. How would you select for them? Because even the engineers and scientists in this present system, a lot of them have a distorted value set also. Mm-hmm. So how would you how would you select the engineers?
Well, would
you go through an assessment?
We have a database of over about 5,000 or 6,000 people who have signed up, and we categorize that and approach the architects and engineers, and they're more apt to have identify with where we're going and want to see it happen. But before we do anything, anybody working with us would go through what Jacques always calls orientation, which are like seminars, learning the project. We I don't think people would want to work on this project if they are people who watch Fox News all the time. Do you know what I mean? I think people will gravitate to this who identify with the direction and want to see it happen. So I don't have too many worries about that. I mean, there might be some people that infiltrate it, but it's a hard thing to kind of simulate and fake, you know?
An interest in this direction.
Right.
Yes,
if you're trying to fake that you understand this, it usually is easy to see. Certain distortions are there.
And it seems like almost any attempt of long-term espionage or sabotage would hopefully be worked out by being present in this newer environment as well.
And I imagine, because that's the way this country works, you know, if the environmental movement gets too well known or enough people go along with it and they're advocating certain things that other people might not want, they do invade it and they do try and break it up. That's been the history of lots of things.
Yes, this does happen.
Activist groups.
Yes.
They've had a lot of practice in that. You know, you can't really protest and change the system. They have all the resources behind it, all the jails, all the technology. It's a hopeless venture that way.
It's all very true.
You have to show something different.
Over the past 5 decades or so, there has been a significant amount of research into human behavior. The findings of this research have effectively filled in a lot of the arguments for a resource-based economy. It is not as if this is just TDP knowledge at the present time. So, what does this mean, the fact that this information is becoming openly available and more greatly understood? What does this mean for TDP and a resource-based economy?
It's wonderful. You know, it's less you have to fight in the culture. But still, behaviorism is really put down a lot still. I think it's coming more into vogue and more into the universities because they are finding it works. But they're using it for things like torture and how to make a buck quicker with the people who are working for you,
how to
manipulate them.
Longer.
Yeah. So, what they're using it for, what they always use it for, is for their own ends, which are terribly destructive processes. So, if we can redirect that knowledge, but still behaviorism is not acknowledged as being the way that we understand things or we learn or we interact with the environment. Because if that was the primary, say, philosophy or direction that they push, then people would start questioning what is happening out there. And it's not a part of academia that supports the free enterprise system. Free enterprise system likes it better when you put the blame on individuals, when they went the wrong way, put them in jail, instead of looking at the environment that created that behavior and keeps creating that behavior. You're going to have to keep putting people in jail. And jail is very profitable now, too.
Oh, yes.
So.
Particularly here in Florida.
Yeah.
How do you specifically define the word behaviorism? What's the definition that you would give to that word?
There's an understanding that what shapes your behavior is your surroundings, more so than putting it on the person or the genes, that your behavior, your values, your expressions, the way you walk, the way you talk, are a product of what you see, what you experience within your environment. It was like the example Jacques gives, that if you have a kid and you raise it in a gray ball and you're able to keep it alive and fed it, they come out a drooling idiot. The more you see, the more you experience, the more you have in your head. It doesn't come, a lot of people think that things come from inside out. It's really from the outside in. Just briefly.
And so by changing the outside environment, we in fact change ourselves and how we interact with others and how we think about ourselves and how we even think about the environment just by changing the environment around us.
Well, that's a huge thing when you think of that, but all your values that are dumped in your head is a dumping ground from this culture. It's very hard to think that, you can't do that in an individual scale. I think you go in the woods and you're already infiltrated with the values that they've pumped in, and the values that you get, even blaming people, self-worth, you get from when you were very young. So it all goes along to perpetuate this system, all your values.
How many interviews have you done in all the years that you've been doing this?
Well, I never used to do them, particularly when I first met Jacques. They referred Jacques. I think the best thing for me was when Jacques' hearing went. So I had to be there in the interview.
Yeah.
I took on the questions, or mostly I took on the questions, other than just telling him. So it was kind of between the both of us, which was kind of good because one played off the other and expanded.
Next question. How many versions of the city are there presently of your proposal? And because I noticed prior to, I think it was around 2010, there was one version of the city that was generally made public, and then the city itself. And then after, I think approximately 2010, there was a few slight modifications. So first question, how many versions are there? And when was the city design that you're proposing last updated?
First of all, I couldn't tell you how many there are, because we're archiving all of Jacques' work now, and we've got over 4,000 sketches and blueprints. We only have one city that we did a model of, and that's only conceptual, the model. It's not very detailed at all, but just showing the layout. Literally, Jacques has hundreds of sketches of different city designs. So there is no one city. It would vary, even as the blueprints develop, it varies and changes.
Is he still working on, he's 98 years old.
Yeah, he still sketches.
Amazing. He's still sketching.
Yeah. And if somebody, when people come here, like there is somebody right now doing some sketches for some CAD files, and he is working with them and sketching to show them.
And the city is divided into these radial belts or segments. So I guess depending upon the individuals who choose to inhabit the city at any point in time, they could customize those radial belts using his available designs. Is that correct?
No, the city would be built, and then people would move in.
Okay.
Yeah. It just depends on the needs of the city, what we're developing, and it depends on what the particular cities will be doing. They would vary in shape and size as well, where they are, what the landscape is, the needs of the people in the area. So they vary.
Okay.
And we have one that we show as a model, and then we have a couple of different cities that are animated. So I think there are about 3 or 4 that are shown, and there are even more being developed right now in animations that we're going to show on our
your upcoming...
Yeah, the third part of the documentary.
With as fast as technology is advancing today, adapting to new changes, so perhaps they maybe had one purpose, and then once it's fulfilled, how they would be adapted for new purposes. Are they highly customizable or upgradable, or what would be the process?
Well, it depends on a lot of things at the time, when they're built and how much access to resources we do have. So, ideally, they are built with change in mind, and they are built in terms of reusing and recycling the materials if they're torn down. But, Jacques gives the example of if you have a monitor, it's built where you just pull it out and put a new one in, or pull out a whole custom cabinet to upgrade the technologies and that you do have, and the electronics that you do have. So everything is considered as changeable. The walls in the convention center would be movable for different things that you need, and I think they do that today.
Yes.
So he's always talked about that. He's talked about that even within homes, where if the kid leaves or something, you convert it, you take down the wall, but it is movable, so you can do that. Upgrade easily. And I think one good example of that is when Jacques used to talk about his automobile, and the engine, you would have 2 handles, pull it out like a dresser drawer and put in another engine, so you don't hold up the car when you want to change the washer that's way under all the parts, like a 3-cent washer. So that's what they do today. If the automobile companies that make the car have to fix it with no profit, I can assure you it would come apart very quickly and easily have interchangeable parts that you just put in, snap in.
And I think we're about to see some of these changes happening soon.
You think of the whole city that way as well.
That's a good explanation, thank you.
Modularity of the city, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I also...
To whatever extent you can, it depends on how many resources we have initially, how much resources. So...
I'm also a very large fan of raised floors, which allows you to have movable walls, but you can, as new technology is added, you can quickly change ducting or plumbing or this kind of stuff. So if you, for whatever reason, if you had to have a kitchen in the home, even though I understand the reasons why that's not ideal, if it was necessary for some reason to help with the transition, when they no longer need it, you can remove it and all the materials without having to waste or destroy anything.
Right. Same thing on the, they dig up the streets today to get to the piping underneath.
Right.
You'd have grading within the street so you can just get to the piping, and all of that is considered. You can't do it today, but you can do it when you build from the ground up. So you rethink everything.
Yeah.
That's the whole idea of doing a new city, so everything becomes much more economical in terms of resources.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I agree with that. It is slowly becoming globally accepted that money is not necessary and that economics, as it is portrayed by the monetary system, is not a science. Hence, TVP no longer has a monopoly on the idea of RBE. So what reasons does any government have to go to you as a global problem solver?
Well, I don't know if any government would. They're not interested in solving problems. So they're interested in making money by developing more problems. Why would they come to us? Essentially, they wouldn't. Things have to really fall apart, and they might want something. We don't see it coming from government.
Okay.
We see it mainly coming from people who might have access to the resources or join together, or as I started to say, if the government's really falling apart and they need some help. I don't know too many. People are talking about a resource-based economy, but I don't think they have as much knowledge and information and blueprints and understanding as the originator.
I agree with that.
They claim they do, but I know I haven't seen any that do as of yet. Any place where they go, where they hear more information, a little bit of information is better than none.
Yeah.
So, I don't know any government who wants to build a resource-based economy in the cities and this direction, how they could go to the other groups who are spin-offs of it. I don't know how they'd get very far.
Well, I think my thoughts were with the question is that it's an idea that's also being developed in the public domain. So while it might not be fully fully understood yet, because it's based on science and not just based on a philosophy or idealism, you could eventually approach the same thing.
Well, I don't know any scientists you could go to, or any group of scientists that are approaching the same thing. Scientists are just as polluted and prostituted in this culture as any other medium, any other profession. So I don't see it evolving through science unless people talk about it. That's why we always say it's so important for people to talk about it, whatever they learn. So I think maybe later, if computers are developed to a certain extent, they might turn to computers and when things fall apart and ask what direction we go, but they'd have to have tentacles into all sorts of aspects of society to come up with appropriate answers, which they're beginning to do more so.
Okay. I didn't necessarily mean scientists, but rather the methods of science.
Yeah.
Because that's the same approach that Jacques used to get to it.
They don't really apply the methods of science to the social system.
Well, we're starting to see a little bit of change, but even, for example, let's talk about us. Like, we are two people who really support the idea of getting us to a resource-based economy. And we have taken the methods of science. So we aren't no longer part of academia either. And there's other people out there like us, too, who have been inspired by this man to try and achieve similar things or to help society get there. So I understand that maybe the mainstream and how these people are like that, but people who've been exposed to you and who want to help carry on your work, and of course there are also people who think they understand it prematurely and they want to still keep their culture in it.
Well, there's a lot of people that come to me in the past and say that we're going to do something based on the Venus Project, and they know certain aspects, and they're going to change the name. I would say it might be more advantageous to work with us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you have proposals and you want to try, do it as a group, and we can help, and we have people that might be able to work with you or something and do it toward the Venus Project ends. Unless you have a particular end that's different, or you want to, do something else, then do your own thing. But to call it a resource-based economy might be contradictory, because there's a lot of groups out there calling it a resource-based economy, and they're doing their own thing, and they have no idea about what this is about. And
Yes.
Some of them are into metaphysics, some of them are into little communities that they want to do, and they think it's a resource-based economy. And, it's kind of foreign to what we're doing, but it's taking on many different meanings.
Some of the confusion, this is just my own perception, might be because you've been in the past, and I don't know the particulars, but you've been very particular in who you work with, and so there are a lot of nuances to the proposal that you're putting forward that, because they may not necessarily be out there in the public, not everybody is as familiar with the direction as probably they ought to be, or they could be if everything was released and the entire proposal was made public to everyone.
We do put out a lot of things. We put out as many things as we can produce. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. With just the limited number of individuals that you're working with.
We have several books we put out for free. We have, when people call and say they want the book and they can't afford it, I tell them there's a torrent out there. It's an old one. I don't know.
Oh, you do that?
Yeah, of course. And so, we're not really trying to hide anything, but people volunteer for us.
But
with us,
doesn't that create a degree? I mean, you've said you have a lot of work that isn't put out, and part of it hasn't put out because you don't.
We have some blueprints and things, yeah.
Do you not see that that's creating some of the confusion because you don't see that as
no. There's Jacques' blueprints.
Uh-huh.
There's Jacques' designs. He's not really. I mean, some of the final ones, if you come to me and say, we want to build your design with you, we have a group of people that want to help, can we do this? Yes, let's do it together. If you come to me and say, I want your blueprints to build this for this organization, no, I'm sorry. That's not what they're made for.
Right, but that's not my question, though. My question is that because the entire system itself, the entire system is a complex whole system, isn't... I mean, yes, particulars, elements of it are out there. A general description is out there, but the whole system, as it's described, and as I guess you and Jacques understand, the nuanced elements of it isn't entirely available. I mean, therefore, people are kind of projecting. The technical the technical elements of the inside infrastructure. I mean, Jacques talks about, if someone will ask you a question, you guys talk about it freely and openly, and we did that this weekend.
Yeah, I'm not, like I said, I don't know what else to say, but I'm not interested in giving specific blueprints to people and putting it out there. He's done that before. I don't know how else to describe it. But we're not interested in propping up the monetary system. We're not interested in certain people getting rich off of his blueprints and designs, or a certain group of people, to use it for an ashram for spiritual people in India. And we've had people approach us for that. We're not interested in selling our city for that. We're not interested in technology. We're interested in the social direction. And we freely put out information about the social direction. Mm-hmm. And we're going to be continuing to do it as quickly as we can, editing more information. And we have lots of lectures that we haven't put out yet. Mm-hmm. We have a limited amount of people who work with us in that area. So if I don't know what you're asking for. Are you particularly personally asking for something?
Oh, no, I'm not personally asking.
Then
I mean,
I don't know
for
what-
example, I personally have been confused. I mean, myself, and so this is why the question's personal to me. I'll admit, because I don't fully understand the way in which you've presented it. I don't fully understand decisioning within the community. I understand that the methods of science will be used, a systems method of engineering will be used, individuals will use critical thinking, but I don't fully understand the complexity of decisioning within the community. And so, therefore, I myself have a degree of confusion. And then that kind of relates to...
Of decisions, you mean who will make the decisions?
Well, not only who, I understand that decisions will be arrived at via an objective and transparent process, probably using some sort of process of parallel inquiry. We have a database of information that
it's just like if you have a pain, you know what I mean? You go through certain testing to see what it is, and the people who do the testing are those who are trained in the instruments to test, and then those who are trained to react to that. You know, if you find out you have an appendix that needs to come out, you get those who are trained. You don't vote on it, and there's no democracy there.
Right.
If there's net need, then it is tried to fulfill.
Yeah. So this has been well described. But Peter Joseph, for example, in one of his recent presentations, kind of laid out sort of a macro and microeconomic calculation. This helped me understand how the concepts of modularity, standardization, and some of the other concepts he put forward would be applied in this sort of system. And so that helped me to more greatly understand decisioning. But that was Peter clarifying it for me.
Good.
So. Yeah, that's all I have to say. I mean, I was slightly confused until I spent a lot more effort, not only looking at the information that the Venus Project was putting out, but also looking at all sources of information in order to clarify what is very complex. Decisioning in any environment is very complex, particularly an environment where people don't fully, people don't have any sort of relationship to, because they come from this culture, this modern society, where decisioning is based more upon subjective ends versus an objective medium.
First of all, people would have to decide that they want to follow this direction, fulfill this direction, or see it happen. And then what are the processes needed to do that, to feed, house, clothe everyone in the world? Do you know what I mean? And it's a technical process in order to do that. And there would be a group of people making sure that things are on track, just like logistics in any building process as well. So, corporations have done it well,
Amazon,
but for their own ends. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
They haven't been turned into the question of how do you feed, house, clothe everyone on the world, don't have any booms and busts, don't have any accidents that we see in technical negligence. So work on the problems that people have, turn science and technology toward the well-being of people. All those things, is just a value shift in how we do things in the culture. The processes are out there. We've been using the processes, but using it for corporations,
So kind of a follow-on to this question, it almost seems inevitable that in developing the first system, we'll have to work with some corrupted entity or some institution that still remains corrupted in its value set or orientation and direction.
No, I don't see that.
You don't see that?
If we have enough funds, no, I don't see that.
Because you'll still be acquiring resources from commercial entities, and therefore you'll still have to work with these commercial entities to some degree. Is that not correct?
Well, initially, yeah, that's true. For the first city, if you're doing the first city, we're not making our own metal, we're not making our own glass.
And these resources the land, ownership starts with the land in many respects, or at least this is how indigenous people saw it.
Well, we wouldn't build the first city unless the land was in the name of our nonprofit organization. And we have a nonprofit organization, so nobody can come along later and say, we don't want this on here anymore, we don't like the way you're running this or that. Okay. So that's priority.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
So a book I've recently read was Jeremy Rifkin's new book, The Zero Marginal Cost Society. Are you familiar with it?
I've just seen him speak about it a couple times, so I can't say I know a whole lot about it. I got the gist of some of it.
Okay. Well, for our listeners and I'll go into a little bit of detail. And I found this very interesting because what he explains very thoroughly is how there's many different exponential trends taking place right now that are essentially leading us to need less money, to reducing our cost of living, And all of these solutions that are being presented in this book are built around access. The internet has been a great facilitator of access. So we have now car sharing, clothing sharing, toy sharing, music sharing, but it's also helped really create like the open source movement, the makers movement, where the Creative Commons, these different things where people are simply creating for the love of creating and sharing with everybody and allowing people to do whatever they want with it, which really does sound very RBE.
I think that's very good exposure to understand the resource-based economy eventually. It all helps, you know.
So,
but I don't think it's a solution.
Well, no, it's not a solution. It's simply what is happening right now with the Third Industrial Revolution. So, no, I would absolutely not call it a solution. It's just that this is the essentially transition that we are in right now, that we have an exponential increase in the amount of nonprofits. So as the current system is exploiting people more and more and giving us less buying power or purchasing power, we are finding alternative means to dramatically reduce our cost of living while increasing our access. And I find this very interesting in that if this idea was combined with universal basic income or universal guaranteed income or whatever form of it, we could essentially create a system where where the goal is to continuously reduce the cost of living to zero while and eventually eliminating the need for any UBI. At which point, I feel that we have achieved a resource-based, we have achieved a moneyless society. It would depend on how, of course, it's organized, whether it be an RBE. But so many of these solutions that are put forth are built upon sustainability. They're built upon designing things so that when you're done with it, it can be recycled 100% into something new. And my concern, well, it's not a concern, it's actually, I have been greatly moved by this, and that we may be able to avoid a collapse, because while we're also on an exponential curve for unemployment, this approach of access, again, greatly facilitated by the internet, it's giving us an alternative and pushing us in the direction of a resource-based economy. So the reason I bring this up now is that this entire idea and solution is based on freely sharing information and ideas with each other. And I see so much opportunity for the Venus Project to get involved in these types of groups, because I understand that historically there's been a lot of bad things that have happened where ideas have been exploited. But now it seems like the tables are almost turning and corporations are being prevented from doing these kinds of things. So by getting the information out there in this open and distributed society, we are able to greatly change our pace without having to take what I would call a second industrial revolution approach that requires a massive amount of capital and infrastructure to create these things, and rather using just different zero marginal cost solutions, we can also start building up the foundation of a resource-based economy.
I couldn't say that because these trends are being explored, that that's going to lead to a resource-based economy. We also have a huge kickback in militarism, in the value systems that are being promoted, the media that promotes those value systems, and people hanging on for dear life to secure their own positions. So, and even if they didn't, I don't know if those trends would go that way. I think it would be great to work with those groups, but in a way to introduce them to an end goal to work toward. I look at those kind of things as kind of patchwork on this system, trying to see how they can exist within this system, trying to extrapolate trends to see where they may go so things are less painful and to some degree. But unless we really have an all-out organization and an end goal for no more boundaries, for all the Earth's resources as a common heritage of all the Earth people, for scientific approaches to things, understanding behaviorism, how we get our values, what's real, what's not within our way of thinking, and how people relate to one another in the environment, understanding the symbiotic relationships between us and the environment, dynamic equilibrium, all those things that Jack talked about for years and years. A resource-based economy would be a lot less painful, would enable, if people really wanted to work toward that, would enable us to approach a whole new dynamic in the way we all live, that doesn't leave anyone out, that's a global engineering approach to an entire world, you know what I mean? And I don't know if we have the luxury to sit back and think that it might eventually evolve that way. And I've always kind of, the people in the open source are really great people and doing a lot of good, but who pays for their bills when the taxes come? You know what I mean? They're doing two jobs. It's not fair to them. I would rather see them in a system where everybody can freely make things and everybody takes advantages of them. Because, I'm not saying stop that. I think it's great, but I don't think it's fair to put it all on a certain people, like that. We have to have a different type of thinking and how that could be done with everybody with that approach, and how it could be organized so you use science and it expands greatly if it is organized. If the cities are reorganized, the way we live is reorganized, the way we think is reorganized. And I would say I would love to work with those groups, but I would like to introduce them to what this direction is as well.
Right.
And maybe they don't have to, they could bypass what they're talking about and step into a future that would help more people directly.
Right. And I think that, yes, a resource-based economy would be easier, but unfortunately it seems that these people are creating these solutions out of necessity, because while they are patchwork, it's their choice is to either starve or go without. So they're creating
You're going to see a
system
lot of that,
access.
more system of sharing.
Yeah.
But I think that's great if they can do that to help secure themselves during these transitions, as long as they know and can ultimately expose other people to where the possibilities might take us with this.
Right. So I guess what I'm saying or sharing is that by being more involved with this, is you can show where we want to go with the resource-based economy and have these people figure out how they can get their needs met, or how they can help create the solutions that will help get us in this direction. I know it's much easier said than done, but
I know Jacques used to use this example too, that you can work all your life, in human rights and say for prisons so the kids don't get beaten. You see a lot of strap marks on their backs and scars and blood, and you can fight for that for 25 years, and then you finally get somebody that comes, that's elected, that takes that away, makes sure that the kids are not beaten anymore in this home and the prisons in this state. And then 4 years later, somebody else comes into office and you have the beatings again.
right.
So this whole system is really tentative, and trying to do patchwork within it, I can't guarantee that it'll go that way unless people know about where to go.
Right.
And working on that means that they're not working towards something else that would solve so many more problems. So to me, it's like, where do you want to stop? Where do you want to get off? But they have never been exposed to something else. So I think to me, it's my job to try and expose people to other things, so they don't have to have the interim of having to go there, because this system can fall very quickly. It may just, and it has a domino effect when it does. So if people have an idea of what to do, how to organize, where we need to go, instead of just joining together communally and trying to share resources, and you know what I mean, that's not going to hold it together if that happens. So we really do need the education as to where to go and how to organize and what to do technically.
So it creates an interesting predicament, though, because say you've been exposed to the resource-based economy, but you're still in the situation that you need to have some solutions now. So there are some people part of the Venus Project that basically are opposed to any patchwork solution, even if it means the death of the individual. So my question is for you, what would...
I don't really have a solution there. I
Okay.
would say work with as many people as you can. I can't tell people how to make a living in this system. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And I don't know. I can only say that I personally couldn't work and put my time toward everybody having an income, because I feel like I got off at a certain place, and if I worked toward what I think would solve more of the problems for everybody, you know, in the long run, so everybody can live well, then I feel like I'm doing a better job, because I've heard about something better. And why get off and stop 6 steps back? You know what I mean?
Right.
Then they say, oh, that person almost had it, but, you know, we could have done this. And I feel very fortunate to learn about something better and learn about something that could take care of people's needs and excel technology and enhance everybody's life very, very quickly if it came into practice. But I got off because I saw that people were having, and it's very important to support that too. You know, people were suffering from a disease, and you know, I really respect people and say Doctors Without Borders that go around the world and work tirelessly and try and help people. That's so important too. I'm not denying that, but I can't get off there and do that. Because I think in the long run, if more people know about a resource-based economy in this direction, it would help civilization tremendously. So I can't speak for anybody else what your needs are. If you think that working toward equal salaries for everybody, equal income for everybody is the most important thing to work on now, I can't deny that, and I would be glad to work with those people, but to introduce them to this as well. You know what I mean? I don't have much time. I work all the time. We work around the clock. And Saturdays, Sundays, we put all our money toward this. I wish I had more time to take off and do something that I think could help directly, you know? I might give some money toward that, but I think my efforts would make much more sense and have much more benefit to more people in the long run if I try to introduce these ideas.
Okay. I'll just ask one more part about this and we'll move on. So one example that I think is very beneficial, it's the idea of creating, for example, giving communities solar panels, these little like rural communities in India and stuff, so that they have no commitment to the monetary system. They are getting the energy they need without having to pay any outside source. So it's actually eliminating their dependency on money in that regard. So it wasn't about...
Do they have to pay taxes? Do they have to...
Not for the energy, the way it's being set up. Well, yes, of course, there's those things.
Are they exposed to people taking their land away? Are they exposed to war, the possibility of war or terrorism? Are they exposed to diseases that they have no money to go to the doctors? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's not just that.
Right. Yeah, I guess it was a step of removing them. So now they're no longer tied to the monetary system in terms of gaining energy. So it's reducing their dependency on it. And some of these communities were essentially self-sustaining, but they have now been given something that gives them more time, more ability.
I'm all for it.
So, okay.
No.
Do you have a program or plan of action for the future?
Well, we are doing that now.
You're following that.
Yeah.
And if
we are working on many things for the future, simultaneously a lot of different things.
And we've clearly seen that a resource-based economy and the Venus Project has become global. Several years ago, you gave a global tour. You got to travel around the world, and in many different countries, many different areas, you introduced and helped further describe a resource-based economy. But if we extrapolate that out and the way in which that plan of action has been put in place, how long do you think it'll take before we see the first city? If we all continue doing what
I can only say if I had the money today, you'd probably see it in a couple of years. But I can't answer those things. I have no power. I have no money. So you're asking really questions that are irrelevant for me to be able to answer. With what I have, with my time, with my skills, I can only say I work at it all the time. I learn things to be able to introduce this to people. I talk to people about development of the cities. Right now, I'm negotiating with 3 different groups of people for the city. I don't know what'll happen. I just keep working on it. And more people, Jock always says, if you do nothing, if you learn about it and you do nothing, I can assure you nothing will happen. But I can't predict. I can't extrapolate. I don't know who we'll meet tomorrow. I don't know if these people who I'm talking to are really going to come through with what they're saying they're going to do with the cities. If they do, I could say we might have something built in 2 years, but I don't know what'll happen.
So it's an interesting question that people have asked me, and I've kind of been curious. What do you think the cost will be for the first city, given your proposal?
Depends on a lot of different things and a lot of different circumstances.
It
if things are volunteered, So I have had a quote for just a typical city, but that might not be what we build. I think the more appropriate question would be here's this much money today, what can you build? You know what I mean? It's like saying, how much is your house going to cost? Well, how big is it? Where is it going to be? What's it going to be built out of? What's the economy going to be like at that time? Are people going to volunteer different resources? I'm open for a lot of things. We do have quotes, but just to give that quote doesn't really mean
it's
much.
Such a relative figure.
Yeah. We're not...
One would almost be impossible.
There, yeah.
One other question. So there's this kind of figure put out there by Dunbar. It's called Dunbar's number. It's anywhere from 150 to 250 people. That was the size of traditional communities, the number of relationships that any one given individual in an indigenous community population generally had relationships with, 150 to approximately 250. Given that information and given that a lot of people feel stressed out in modern cities, how do you think that data relates to the Venus Project? Do you think it's irrelevant because people...
Yeah, it's not. It really isn't. I would be stressed out in the city. I'm stressed out in the monetary system. Yeah. So, the system creates a lot of stress.
And it does create a lot of stress.
So I don't see it really that relevant.
Okay.
Jacques always says he thinks that the biggest city would probably be about 1 million, but that could vary as time goes on.
Mm-hmm.
So even the first city, I couldn't even give you a number, because we would have to see how much land we have, how much arable land, how much that would support, how many people, how many houses, how many apartments we can build. That'll determine the agricultural belt.
Mm-hmm.
First determine if we have water on there. That will determine how many people before all that. So there's a lot of different variables that if you said I have a location of land in this spot, I'd first have to do the survey, see what it's like, and we have so much, and then we have so much funds. What can you do? And I can tell you eventually after the prints are done how many people it would hold, but it has so many variables, that question.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't relate our cities to any of the restrictions of how they. I mean, if we had a resource-based economy, of course, the first one might be a hybrid between the two, so there would be certain stresses, and there might be certain amount of money that we might have to produce in order to keep the city going. There's a lot of things to consider.
And do you have any blueprints for this hybrid system? Do you have any conceptual designs or processes for how the hybrid system might work?
Well, yeah, Jacques talked about it a lot too, but we'd have to really see what the circumstances are at the time, what we're up against, and what we need to do.
I assume that it would also be dependent upon the jurisdiction within which the city was placed.
Yes, that
would
too.
be another complex
all those
factor.
circumstances. Yeah. Ideally, we wouldn't want to do it in the United States, though. We'd want to do it in another country. I don't think people are as well educated in a lot of different areas as they are from going around the world and seeing what other people know and what they've been exposed to. And a lot of people in this country are very spoiled. They've had a lot of things, and they have a lot of guns, and they're very violently oriented. And I think it would be very difficult if there was all of a sudden a great scarcity. So other countries might be easier a transition.
What are your opinions on open source, patent and copyright?
Well, in an ultimate resource-based economy, there wouldn't be patents and copyrights. It would be whatever is learned, whatever is obtained, goes directly into the system without any blockage. Because there is no money, so you don't have to worry about that type of thing. There are no great men. Everybody's recognized for whatever they do, even if it isn't something that solves a problem. They've learned what doesn't work. So that's very useful as well, as long as they work at it. So, open source is an approach today, which is wonderful too, but and people are doing that, and a lot of people are benefiting from certain things, but it's not really like an open source that we're talking about with a resource-based economy. Or you can say everything becomes open source. You can say it that way too.
And I understand this is a tricky area of topic. What parts would you like to be able to make open source in using today's words? And I do understand you've answered this question in some ways, but is there anything else that you wish you could make open source now that you feel that if you did, it would still be abused by the system or mistreated by even the people who are using it as open source?
I think we've gone over that.
Okay.
I don't know particularly what, are you talking about how you build this building? A lot of people come to us and say, can we have the prints to your buildings and things like that? But I would say we're not in the building business. You know what I mean? I always tell them where to go to get a dome. Where, if they're interested in just a dome or a building or a high rise. Jacques always says that when people come to him and say they want him to build a high rise, he says, I'm not interested in doing a monument to my own ego. We're interested in a social direction.
Right.
And we'd like to see these designs be used for that.
But do you see benefit? For example, let's go with the house, as you mentioned. A dome is much more efficient. So if people were able to build their own...
There are domes on the market.
Yes, I've seen many.
Yeah, I'd say monolithic dome it's not as strong as this, but I check monolithic domes.
But to empower people to not have to go to a corporation, but rather to be able to do it as you guys did. I mean, while I don't personally feel that's propagating the current system, but rather it's helping to reduce the amount of resources that are being built in homes and empowering people on some level.
Well, then you get into a whole new thing that we don't have time to divert our attention to.
Okay,
you know what I mean?
That's the advantage of open source is you don't have to attend to it. You just put it out there and let people do what they want with it.
It's possible, but
Okay.
I spend my time doing other things.
Okay.
I don't think doing a dome or putting a dome out there is going to solve the problems.
I agree with that statement also.
So I'm just not concerned with taking my time out to do those kind of things. And our domes were built for the zoning board here and the restrictions here. And if somebody built a dome based on your blueprints and the roof fell in, you can get sued. I just can't take on those things in this culture. So I'm not involved in those things in this culture. And if somebody's interested in the Venus Project and wants to learn about the Venus Project and a new way of thinking, so they can bypass the problems and learn to get along with other people better and learn to understand where their problems may come from and bypass them as well, better understanding of how they think and what they think and where it comes from. then this is fine. If they want to learn about the Venus Project, I can direct them to different things. But I'm not in the building business, the house building business. I'm not, if somebody wanted to back a research center to build some of our things, we might do that as well. But we would rather not divert into those directions. We don't have much time.
Right.
You know what I mean? Getting into solar panels and getting into a well that's more efficient when they're, as I said, building bombs quicker, there's more hatred, the wars are continuous. There's a tremendous urgency, and those things will not solve the problems. So I'd rather work on things that I think can help more people in the long run and solve more problems and get us out of the polluted air, polluted water, polluted value systems, polluted houses, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So if people are interested in the Venus Project, check out thevenusproject.com and learn about that and talk to other people about it as a way out of a social sanity that we could have.
So thank you for sharing that.
Kind of related, have you had architects actually really kind of give you their drawings or their specifications and say, here, we'd like you to add this to the city, or how might you integrate this? Have you ever had that happen? Say architects contact you?
We have, but there's really nothing that we could integrate, because Jacques' way of thinking is an integral system, and what they're doing is kind of doesn't fit within it. You know, it's
So you've said thank you, but we can't.
Yeah.
We don't really say
and at the time we'll have to train architects to this type of thinking. We've always said that if we were able to build in, say, Laos or something like that, if they came along and said, okay, we want a city there, hopefully we would work with their college students as well and teach them what we're doing and bring them along with this type of thinking and this type of building. And we would want to work locally with the students and the architects.
So where would you like to go from here?
Which one?
So this weekend we got the chance to see The Choice Is Ours, and we saw the first 2 episodes. We haven't seen the 3rd episode yet. The first 2 episodes basically deal with a lot of the problems that have cropped up and that we see in modern society, a lot of the issues. Some people were, I don't generally, but using the words of others, some people might refer to these issues as the negativity of modern society. On the Kickstarter page, and I quote, it says, "This series shows an optimistic vision of the world if we apply science and technology for the benefit of all people and the environment." But instead, the first 2 episodes didn't really relate to that particular statement. So how did you arrive at the decision to portray some of the negative nuances of modern society instead of making the entire 3-part series more about the solution?
Well, we felt that if there was somebody new coming in to watch it, and we always gear it to people who are new, the first series talks about a little bit about the state of where we are now. And then I would say this first series mainly talks about behaviorism and how we acquire our behavior and how we're part of nature and how our behavior acts upon us. And the second series is looking at what formulates our behavior. And we're trying, we're trying to point out that what we are immersed in shapes us, shapes our values, shapes our behavior, shapes our competitive biases and prejudice and everything else, competitiveness. And then at the end we kind of sum it up saying that if this is not human nature, we're addressing the question of human nature, and I hope you got all this out of that it's not human nature, that it is the environment, that it is the monetary system itself that creates the problems. And at the end of the second one, we show a little teaser about the alternative to this. And hopefully the third one will be even longer. I don't know at this point. But we wanted the Venus Project to have those videos, that information backing this up as well. And we thought that was a good time to do it. Paradise or Oblivion does that a little bit, but mainly shows the Venus Project. But we will be showing a lot of the Venus Project in the third one, and I still struggle with it now, whether we should have just gone to that, and Jacques says, oh, we should just go to that because there is a tremendous urgency, and but I thought we needed the other as well. So we're still going to address the Venus Project quite a bit on the third one, but we needed a backup of where we were, and I hope people got what I just mentioned out of those first two as well.
Yes, we did.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Because that's very important. If you just show them where you want to go, they think, oh, it's utopian. People are not like that. But if you show them that behavior is shaped by the environment, that people can adapt and be, they can change, and how they acquire their behavior in the first place is from the environment. So show that what we do need is a very different environment and what that could be ultimately.
And the third episode is about that direction. Okay.
Yeah. And we'll be doing more on that too. And there'll be lots of new animations that are quite nice too.
We're certainly looking forward to those.
Yeah, too.
Absolutely. Everybody I speak with is very excited for that. So
I hope people will come back to the third one after seeing all that. And it is negative. The system is very negative. Yeah.
Which one of these would you propose?
Let's start with this, and then if we need to.
Is there a single thing that you would like our listeners to take away from this conversation with you? What would you like that to be? What do you think the most important message you want to send out?
I guess mainly just, look into our website, learn more about the Venus Project, understand that a lot of people write to us and say, I wanted to commit suicide, I see no hope out there, but there is hope. There is a way of organizing our science and technology so everybody can live well, and everybody can live better than the most wealthy people of today. That's not just a slogan, but when you do organize science and technology toward a way of life that bypasses money, then the outcome is quite different. The people are quite different. There is no fixed human nature, that it's pliable and malleable depending on where you grow up and what your environment is. So the Venus Project is not a utopian idea, because there is no such thing as utopia. We don't think and consider utopia as a fixed notion. We've arrived at the Venus Project. That's just the beginning of everything else, beginning of just being able to live and expand and excel with technology. So I don't know where it'll go, but we're living in the Middle Ages now. Our wars are the same. The cars are different, the trains are different, but the value systems are the same. We're blowing each other up for scarce resources, for artificial scarce resources. The resources aren't scarce. Mm-hmm. We can make a far better environment than what the Venus Project proposes. When you put science on scarce issues, that's what they'd be used for in the future too. What our problems are, put them on real problems, which is similar to everybody: heart disease, clean air, clean water, arable land, better medical care. We don't do that with science. We're blowing each other up with science. We're competing with one another. So, as I said, they're prostitutes. But to learn more about it, check out thevenusproject.com.
And what are 3 additional recommendations that you could give to people who are familiar with this direction, who have come to the Venus Project, who have read all the material and want to support this direction and evolve this direction, apply their own creative efforts toward the vision, I guess, the emergent vision that we all have? What are 3 concrete recommendations that you could give someone who reasonably greatly understands this direction?
Great. I'd say practice talking to other people about it. That's something in a lifetime of ongoing education, to be able to get to other people so they understand it. Jacques always has a saying about, you might have read 50 books and you're approaching somebody who hasn't read the first book yet. So practice talking to people who have never heard anything about it, so you can bring them up to date as much as possible. Practice talking to different groups, whether it's religion or political or ecological or whatever, but that's a lifetime of work, learning how to teach other people about this. I would say join us if you have something you want to do. We have access to proposals, for people to write in proposals to see if we would want to work with you with it, or we have available people or whatever else, resources that we could work with you with. And join some of our groups. We have lots of people who are working toward this. We have the point of contacts all over the world, and it's just developing too. I think, I don't know how many they have. These are people who just volunteer and give other people courses, so people, when they come to you, if you're a point of contact in a certain area, you can answer questions with them, and they meet at a certain time and they discuss what they're doing. We have people doing all sorts of things, doing TED Talks about this, having displays in the streets of some of Jacques' designs. I think in Bulgaria just recently they must have shown about 100 huge posters, 4x5 posters in the streets in the particular area they developed that. They have conferences, like in Israel, they just had a conference about the Venus Project of over 400 people. And in Russia, they acquired a television station for the future based on our chapter of the Venus Project. So there's a lot going on, much more than that. We have a magazine, which we'd love to have people write articles for, submit articles for about this direction on different topics too. You know, they're addressing technology and cybernation and all sorts of things. If you're interested in writing, if you're interested in translating, we have a group that translating our different materials in different languages. I know there's a translate-a-thon or something like that, where they're taking Jacques' book, The Best That Money Can't Buy, and translating it in different languages, and then we'll put it up for an e-book. We have lots of different projects going on. If you're a professional, when you sign up on the community page, you automatically sign up on our database. You can put whatever profession you work in, so hopefully we can call upon you later. If you're interested in working with us in different fields, just check out the website under Get Involved. And that's changing. We're going to have a new list up soon, hopefully by the time this comes out. But check out the website for different things.
That concludes it. Thank you very much, Roxanne Meadows. We appreciate it.
Really
Thank you.
Appreciate this.